Hello and welcome to Moving Forward, a podcast by Good Habits. I'm your host, Remy Reuling. In this podcast, we will make sure that you get all the insights that you need to build a high-performing learner culture and to future-proof your organization. Whether you're an HR professional, a learning and development manager, or anyone looking to give your team a leg up, you'll learn the trends and tricks to get your people learning and moving forward. In each episode, we invite an expert or two to unpack some key statements designed to get them sharing their best insights. In this episode, we explore the science of habit building, how habits are formed, the key factors that influence them, and what it really takes to make them stick for the long haul. To help unpack this, I'd like to welcome Amy Jane Giele and Sietske van der Meulen. Thanks for joining us, both of you. I'd like to start with you, Amy. Who are you? What do you do?
My name is Dr. Amy Jane Giele, and I'm a political scientist, but also a certified Tiny Habit coach. I got certified at the Tiny Habits Academy of Dr. B.J. Fogg from Stanford University.
Awesome. And I already see the whole habit part coming up here. But I think for Sietske, that this is going to go in handy for you too. What do you do here?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm Sietske van der Meulen. I'm the head of educational design within Good Habits. So I'm responsible for the educational quality of all the content that we make. And of course, in my line of work, I really need to think about, okay, how do we get people to start learning?
Yeah.
How do we keep them motivated? How do we make sure that they are able to transfer what they learn to their own daily practice?
Awesome. Well, we'll be talking about motivation and habits a lot, right? But to do this, I think you guys already know, but for the people at home, we go through a couple of statements. I'll read them out. We'll have a discussion, and let's see what we can get out of that discussion. Right. Statement number 1. Motivation is an unstable foundation for habits. I think I really agree with this statement, right? I know a lot about motivation and what can and cannot work. But as a habits coach, for instance, what do you think about motivation?
Motivation is an important factor, but it's not the sole factor for habit formation and behavior change, because motivation, it's not consistent. It's, we haven't got a consistent motivation 365 days a year. And we really know that from New Year's resolutions. You know, at the beginning of the year, we all think, we've got new goals and new habits and we're really going to go for it and we're really going to do this. And then the weeks pass and, life happens, basically.
The couch happens usually.
The couch happens. We feel less energized. Some days our battery is charged, but other days it's depleted. So if you build your habits and behavior change solely along the lines of dependency of motivation, most likely they won't be successful.
That's a really good thing, because there are many types of motivation, right? You've got intrinsic, extrinsic, all kinds of ways to trigger that motivation too. But really sticking to it, that seems to be the problem. And just starting at motivation itself, that can be fickle. Sietske, do we have anything that works to get that motivation up, or?
I think, just as Amy Jane is saying it comes down to that motivation is most importantly at the start of creating a new thing or learning a new thing, because that is your ignition, where you actually start, you know. It isn't necessarily the fuel, because I agree that there are other things that are far more powerful there. But specifically motivation at the beginning, especially when it comes from people themselves, if they want to change their behavior, if they want to learn something, that is the most powerful source that you can have.
Yeah, but that's intrinsic though, right?
Yeah.
And from what I've learned about motivation is that intrinsic motivation is the hardest thing to influence. It needs to come from a person within the person itself. Isn't that the case?
Yeah, true. So, for instance, with learning, it comes down to that people really see, hey, I want to learn something new because I experience currently that I need to up my skill, that there's something that I can't do right now and that I really want to do. And the more you can design it in a way that people think, hey, this is why it is important to me, why it's relevant to me, and this is why I personally want to choose to actually do something with that, that's how you get people to learn, and that it's not the feeling like that they don't have the feeling like I must do it.
Right.
It's more that, hey, I know I want to learn this and I know why it's relevant for me.
Right, right. Do you see the same thing in your line of work? I mean, you must come across a lot of highly motivated people, let's say.
Yeah, I do. But what I would like to add, because I was triggered by sort of the metaphor of the ignition and the fuel, and that's something that very much resonates with the Fogg behavior model. I briefly spoke about Dr. B.J. Fogg, he's the one who designed that model.
Could you explain that model?
Yeah. Yeah, so the Fogg behavior model basically states that behavior changes when motivation, ability, and prompts occur at the same moment. So motivation can fluctuate, and the trick is that you need to make something easy to do. Because if something is hard to do, you need those really high levels of motivation. But as I said, motivation is not consistent. So you always indeed need a spark. It needs to align with your values. It's a goal, an ambition. It needs to align with something sort of deeply, deeply personal. But it doesn't have to be this super high motivation, because as long as you make it easier to do, it becomes easier. And that's, I think, also a very important message. People often think if they can't keep up with their habits, they see it as a personal flaw. You know, I'm not motivated enough. I haven't got enough stamina. But it's not a personal flaw. It's a design flaw. You need to make it easier to do instead of focusing on that motivation.
I hear you sort of agreeing with that?
Yeah, I can imagine that is also why it's easier to fall into bad habits instead of work on your good habits, because bad habits often are easier to continue than good habits.
Is that the case then, that we need to make bad habits out of good habits, or rather the behavior that we want people to exhibit?
I think you need to focus, because people often contact me because they want to get rid of their bad habits. But I always say you need to focus on creating a positive alternative.
Right.
And something that is easy to do, something that you really want to do, instead of focus. If you keep focusing on what you don't want to do, it becomes sort of a negative story, a negative focus, and that's not helpful.
Right. But what is more difficult than getting rid of the bad habit or learning the good one?
The good one, learning the good one, is sort of easier to do than just not doing the bad one anymore. Let me give you an example to make it a bit more concrete, but not necessarily something to do with learning and development. But most people hate it that they spend so much time on their phones. So if they want to start off with habit formation, they usually tell me, I want to spend less time on my phone.
Right.
But that's really, really difficult to just not spend time on your phone. So what I then say is you need to create a positive alternative. What would you like to do with the time that you then suddenly gain by not spending all those hours scrolling on your phone? And that's going to then be your new habit. And every time you feel the urge to go on your phone, you go and do your new habit. If you want to read more books, make sure there's a book on your bedside cabinet instead of the phone on your bedside cabinet.
Right. And that's also a very difficult thing, at least for me, right? I'd love to read more books, but I just can't seem to find the time, because there's the phone and there's all the other stuff that I want to do. So getting it back to motivation, for me, I'm really motivated to read more books. They're good for you. You can learn a lot from them. But for me, it's not enough, right? But I do want to learn some stuff. So Sietske, for instance, when we're looking at L&D, right? So bringing it back to L&D, you can motivate people to start learning something, but how do you then keep that learning habit up?
It comes down to connecting it to things that you already do. So just as the example with I want to be able to read more and have less time, spend less time on my phone. There's your whole phone is designed to keep you in there, to actually
addicted.
Yeah, to stay addicted, indeed. And what indeed like you're saying, you're focusing then on, oh no, I don't want to spend time on my phone, whereas you should think about, hey, what's the behavior that you do want to show? And it's those behaviors that you need to stimulate and to make really easy, for instance, by placing the book next to your bedside table. Now, the comparison to L&D, there indeed also you need to make it really easy for people to actually connect it to the things that they were already doing. So the meeting that they were already having, the system that they're already using, and also the knowledge that they already have. If you want people to internalize what they've learned, it's also the most powerful thing to do is to activate the knowledge that they already have and connect it to there, because then they can make connections between, I already know this and this is the new information that I'm learning. And then it's way more easier to retain that.
Right. So structure is basically the name of the game, structuring everything that you're supposed to do.
Well, I think that's not the only thing. Of course, you need a system and you need a structure and you need to design the environment. But Tiny Habits is about more. It's about creating those sort of tiny behaviors, and those are sort of the conditional circumstances in which you can do that.
Right. Tiny habits, that's one of the bigger ones, right? That's also making it a lot smaller, bite-sized, you almost called it, I think. I love that word, bite-sized habits. But there's another thing that we need to discuss in that sense, and that coincidentally is statement number 2. I'll just read it out. And statement number 2, it takes 21 days to build a habit. There we have it. Structure, that's number 1. Making it tiny, that's number 2. Getting that motivation up, that's number 3. And then those 21 days? How do you guys feel about that?
It's the biggest myth about habit formation.
We have a naysayer. We have a denier. There we go. Why is that?
There's a research being conducted, and that's why this number of 21, and it's appealing. You know, if I just stick to it for 21 days, then the magic will happen. So since then, more research has been conducted, and now also based on a highly cited article from the University College of London, it takes between the 18 and 254 days. So it's not necessarily the days, it's the repetitions.
Yeah.
Because basically you need to program the new behavior into your brain. And that's very dependent on the complexity of the new habit, the new behavior, and the different circumstances. But I would still like to move away from, 21 days or between the 18 and 254 days.
The whole time frame
and
thing.
Also about the repetitions, because I know James Clear, who wrote the Atomic Habits book, said you can only skip a habit one day. And if you do that twice, then you're doomed to fail. And I don't want to give people that sort of doom or gloom perspective that, if you failed your habit or forgotten your habit one day, like, oh no, now I can't
Everything's
do it
out of the
anymore.
window. Yeah.
The crucial factor is making it easy and making it as tiny as possible so that whatever happens in life, you can always do your habit. And if it doesn't happen today, that you can start again tomorrow.
Right. Those 18 to 200 and something 54, you said?
Yeah.
18 to 254 days. Again, that's a really broad time frame, right? And trying to get some consistency on there. I mean, I get that we're thinking in time frames, especially if you factor in stuff like consistency, doing that little habit every day, right? But it's also hard to keep up. So if we're taking it into the working space, let's keep it there for now, right? What do we need to do to have people change their behavior? Because we're talking about behavior change so rapidly, because 18 days, like that's the bare minimum, right? 18 days. That means just constantly working on it. But isn't that like an attack on your personal time?
But that depends again on how you interpret radical change in behavior, because indeed, if you keep it small and repeat it every day, then it doesn't require a lot of effort. but you still are able to change certain things. And I think that is what brings you to success.
Right. So keeping it tiny, not being busy with it all day, every day, but making it smaller. Okay. Does that work though? Sorry, you wanted to say something. Let's.
No, what I would like to add is that we need to sort of lose that perspective of go big, go home. And that's often the reaction I get when I talk about tiny habits. How on earth are tiny habits going to help with change?
Yeah.
And of course, within 18 days, tiny habits are not going to contribute to this enormous transformation. But it's about the sort of the compound interest, building one habit onto the other. And if you're noticing the effect of one positive habit, then you think, okay, but if this is working for me, let's try another one. And that helps you with that transformative change.
Right. But that's also, you're saying compounding interest, right? Interests me. There you go. The first pun of the episode. But that compound interest means investing, right? So it also means investing in that first habit. Is that also the hardest one to start? And from there on, it rolls? What do you guys know about that?
I think it's important first to realize that that investing, especially if you start tiny and make it easy, make it bite-sized, then it doesn't feel like something really big you have to do. So let's say for learning and development, you want to read more books on personal growth or a specific topic. Instead of saying, I want to read at least one book a week, you say, after I don't know if you want to do it during working hours or in the evening, but let's say after I get into bed, I will read one page of the book. And if it's just that one page and you're really tired and you're starting to fall asleep, that's fine. But then you're successful in that habit and then you just close your book. But usually what happens is you start reading that first page and that's interesting. And then before you know it, you're 20 pages down. You're page turning. And that's the essence of tiny habits, making so easy, so small that it doesn't feel like a big effort.
Right.
And that if you've got the time and the energy, you can always do more. But it's about setting that bar lower instead of higher so that you can always do your habit and feel good about it.
That's really interesting because for me, I'm that case, right? That reading books case. Just told you guys about it. Making it one page and not within a time frame, that would certainly help for me. But that's also my personal time that I can make any way that I want, right? I can set that up when I go to bed or when I first get up or do breakfast. But I think it changes if we're looking at work, right? Work hours. Usually your whole agenda, your calendar is full with, I don't know, meetings or production work or other stuff. So what sort of advice would you give? I think this is mostly a question for you, but what sort of advice would you give the person trying to start up a new habit during work?
Can I maybe answer that question?
Yeah, go for it.
So I think it's very important to find anchor moments, because that's a crucial element of the tiny habits, finding anchor moments throughout your workday. And anchor moments are moments that serve as a reminder to do your new habit. So walking into the office, setting up your computer, opening up your laptop, going into a meeting, coming out of a meeting, walking to the coffee machine. There are many different moments you can have that you can connect new habits to. For example, so you walk into the office, you open your laptop or you press the button of your desktop. Okay, we're all busy. We've all got meetings. But let's say instead of diving right into your email or the first call, why not open a page of an ebook? It's
in the same amount of time.
Yeah. And then you can go on to do your emails. But it's also about sort of prioritizing, but in a way that it doesn't feel like overwhelming. If you say, I want to read a book and I'm going to carve out 1 hour a day in my work schedule, then most likely other colleagues will plan meetings and you'll have a deadline. Oh, no, can't do the book today. Okay, I'll start on it tomorrow. But if you do that one page every morning after you sort of open your laptop, then that's much more easier to do and to sustain.
Good. Yeah. For me, that is usually just getting a coffee, right? I get home or I get at work, I don't know. I start up my laptop and I grab myself a coffee.
And then you maybe scroll on your phone, right?
Got me there. Yeah, but the point I'm trying to make with that is it's just as easy to set up a bad habit then. So what do we need to do to change that into starting up a good habit, a good tiny habit?
Well, there's different factors that come into account, but it's very important to design your environment, for example. So let's say you are working from home and the first thing you do is have a cup of coffee, and after that you start up your laptop. After I have my cup of coffee, I will put my phone away. Then...
Lock it away.
Yeah.
Away with that thing.
Even just for 5 minutes. Then I'll walk to my desk or whatever, and I'll open my laptop or computer, and then I will read one page either on the computer, or I will have, and that's designing your environment, having the book next to your computer.
Oh, right. Yeah. So designing your environment to be cohesive in your habits journey, let's say.
Isn't it also connected to the intention that you have? Because reading a book, for the sake of reading a book, of course, that is difficult to maintain. However, if you're reading a book with the intention that you actually want to learn something out of it, or like we're saying, a book connected to personal leadership, for instance, when you know you're reading that book for that intention, then it becomes different. Because like I'm thinking about the comparison that you have in learning, like you can spend 8 hours of doing online courses or workshops or whatever, but that only sticks if you know what you're doing it for. Yeah, what you're doing it for, what you want to gain out of it, and nothing is as powerful as at the end of a workshop say, okay, now these are the things that I'm going to do with it, because otherwise, your knowledge might be gone, or indeed, after reading the book, you think, okay, I'm done, and now move on to the next, which might not be that powerful. I'm curious how you feel about that.
No, I totally agree. And that basically comes back to the motivation we previously spoke about. You always need some form of intrinsic motivation. And it needs to align with your goals and with your ambition. I mean, not just randomly read a book, but because you're interested in learning about leadership or personal growth or about habit design.
Right. So it's also, we're starting with motivation, right? But the motivation could also be, I want to read books, done. However, that would then not be as powerful as trying to learn something and therefore using that book and therefore creating that habit sort of out of thin air because you want to do something special with your time.
If you're reading a book indeed with the hope that you're going to change something, then probably while reading that page you feel, I know more about this topic, I feel connected, but I also have the feeling that I'm becoming more confident in this topic. And then every page that you read gives you more motivation indeed to keep going, because you have the feeling, hey, I accomplished something.
Yeah. I'm going to latch on to that for statement number 3, because that is perfect for that statement. Thank you for the bridge. Statement number 3, celebrating successes is an undervalued part of L&D. That was what you were talking about, right? Yeah. I have a success, a tiny success, but it is a success.
Yeah. It reminds me of the self-determination theory. So we talked about, of course, motivation, how you should be able to choose your own goals and be in control. But at the end, the reward is that you feel, hey, I'm getting better at this. I didn't know something that I know now.
Right.
I can keep up with the habit every day. Maybe not every day, but I see progress, not perfection, but I see progress.
Making it easier for you to build it.
Yeah.
So that is what success does for you, making things easier to stay on the course, let's say.
Yeah. Yeah.
In both senses of the word, the course and your course.
Yeah. Indeed. If you're talking about celebrating successes, I think the most powerful thing is that you see, okay, I'm learning this, I'm getting better at it every step that you grow.
Right, every step of the way. There's also the thing about rewards. We know that rewards, they can be really powerful. It's also one of the theories that is employed most, right? The hook theory, where you have actions, triggers, rewards. But rewards usually pinpoint the extrinsic motivation part of your habit forming process. So I would say that rewards are fun and all, but they work only up to a certain point. Or is that completely wrong of me to think?
No, I agree with you on that. And that's also the essence of the tiny habits. So we've spoken about those anchor moments that you can connect your new habits to. Then the new habits need to be super, super tiny, bite-sized. But then the third crucial element of successful habit formation is celebrations. And that's not the same as reward. Celebration is about sort of creating that instant, happy, successful feeling.
Right.
Because that releases dopamine and that programs the new behavior or the new habit into your brain. I often get the question, if I've done my new habit, then can I pour myself an Aperol Spritz or can I have a piece of chocolate cake?
Yeah, let's get the bad habits in there too.
Yeah, but that's not the essence. That's not celebration. That's delayed gratification. So celebration is crucial, and that's the same with rewards. If you give people sort of a certificate at the end, I mean, that's nice, and people appreciate it. But if you really want to sort of help the habit formation process and really make it sort of intrinsic, then you need to do it throughout the whole learning and development process, and not completely at the end with like a LinkedIn badge or a reward or a certificate or something like that.
Yeah, there's also the difference, right, between the reward in and of itself, the chocolate cake, the Aperol Spritz, the thing that you're getting, the badge, and the actual feeling of success. Is there a difference there? Do you guys know? I mean, the reward itself, it's just a thing. So that's gratification.
Yeah.
But the feeling of reward might be detached from that. So would be, as L&D, would we need to set up those rewards? Do we need to celebrate the win of a team in learning something with those badges, with something concrete? Or is it something different? Is it a more personal thing?
I prefer something different and indeed more personal that sort of relates to their sort of values, why they're learning something. But if you're, let's say you do a training course and it's spread out over several weeks or months, then instead of giving them a certificate, you want them to celebrate their success throughout the process so that they every time they've done like a module, that they immediately celebrate that by saying, yay, good job.
Awesome, you've completed this.
Yes, I've completed this. And what works even better, if you make your celebration purpose-based. So you connect it to the actual purpose of why you're learning this. So let's say you want to learn more about personal leadership and you're doing a course on that. Then you can say, yay, well done, Amy Jane. This helps you become a better leader. So then you connect it to the actual purpose while you're doing the course.
Yeah, that's also really getting back to the book, right? We're trying to read the book. For instance, we have the sort of reminder thing up on our laptop, read this one page, and then you celebrate the success not by giving yourself some chocolate because you read the one page, but you recap what you've actually learned and you feel more equipped to deal with the daily workings of life, let's say. But that is a little bit of that part of the self-determination theory, right? Getting that self-efficacy up.
Yeah. And related to the competency as well, like I said earlier. So it's related to, I have the feeling that after this, Well, one, it is people like checkboxes, of course. So the feeling that
the to-do lists.
yeah,
Done.
Yeah, this is done indeed. But then if you can connect it indeed to the purpose that you had already, then you can actually do something with that.
Right. And there's no 18 days or 254 days.
Exactly.
You're just doing it. And all of a sudden it starts becoming a habit. Cool. All right, let's get into the fourth statement because we've touched upon some of the aspects of this one, but I'll just read it for you guys first. Statement number 4. Learning habits fail without the right environment. The right environment. That is an important thing. I know a lot of people, this is more about getting bad habits out of your system, but I know a lot of people that smoke, they try to give up smoking, and then they go to band repetition, and voila, they're smoking again, because there's a lot of people out there. So this environment, I absolutely agree with this, right? The environment needs to help that person. First of all, do you agree that the environment is a really important factor in this?
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. Getting that out of the way, how do you make that environment supportive?
For me, it comes down to making sure that people have the feeling that they're together in this. So as you're explaining, indeed, if people are in an environment where they smoke and you have the resolution, okay, I won't smoke again, that is very difficult. But having an environment that actually supports, where people have the feeling, we're doing this together, I'm not smoking anymore and you are not as well, that helps for people to actually be able to maintain the habit of not smoking.
Cool.
And I think if you connect that specifically to learning, because very often, we talk about leaderboards and creating that, which gives a sort of competition, which in a way is powerful, but the real connection comes when people together have the feeling that they learn something.
Yeah, right, because that is a little bit of gamification that you're touching upon, that a lot of platforms, learning providers get on their system because it works so well. But you're saying the reason why it works so well is it introduces a sort of social element, where everyone's in it together and everyone's working together.
Yeah.
Okay, but then that competition also makes you want to have other people fail, right? So you succeed. Isn't there a sort of dichotomy there?
I'm not sure if it's really that you want other people to fail, right? It's you want to
highly competitive people, maybe.
No, I think it's only connected to. Of course, you want to be the best at certain things, and you also have the fear of missing out, that you want to be there as well when people are talking about certain things, or when they enrolling in such things. But the cool thing about such leaderboard is that you're all doing the same thing.
Right.
You're all focusing on the topic that makes you go up on the leaderboard. And that sense of community, that is what you want to gain.
That's mostly about the people, right? So if you want your employees to learn, for instance, then get the people learning together. Make them a team, make them celebrate their wins together. But it's not an environment. I mean, it's not just about people, right? It's also about setting up the right tools, putting away that mobile phone, for instance. So if you want to make your environment conducive, and I mean your actual environment, the table, for instance, conducive to habit forming, how would one go about that?
Well, I'm not sure about how you design the table, but it's very important indeed not to just focus on the people, but it's also about the culture, the work ethics. Let's say you really want to prioritize personal leadership and personal growth, and you really want people to start reading books about it, for example. If you constantly plan meetings at 9 o'clock in the morning, when you know that is the time that's sort of scientifically proven, that's the best moment to do deep work and work on deeply personal projects, then you're not creating the right learning environment. And it's also about setting an example about leadership. You can say, we all want you as a team to learn, but then not learn and set the example as the leadership. So that's also an important factor. And it's not just sort of the social element, but also having an accountability partner, having colleagues that sort of can also be your peer and be your buddy and indeed remind you. And I said motivation is not the most important, but sometimes your motivation can be really low, and then it can help that you've got a colleague who can motivate you to get starting again.
Right. So there's more to it than just learning together. It's also keeping each other accountable for the habits that you're trying to build. So if I were an L&D worker, I'll just say worker, what would I do to create that environment for people? Or is it just something that I drop on people and then they have to do it themselves? This is a really important topic for most L&D personnel because that is the line of work that they're in, of course.
I'd like to sort of co-create it with the people themselves. So there's a method within the Tiny Habits method called magic wanding. And what we do...
Sorry, magic wanding?
Magic wanding.
As in the magic wand, the Harry Potter stuff? Okay.
Yeah. So if there's one thing you'd really like to change in the organization, or if there's one thing you'd really like to learn, really like to develop, what would that then be? And take that as a starting point, because then you also tap into that intrinsic motivation. And then together brainstorm, okay, what tiny behaviors can we then do that help contribute to that goal or to that specific aim? And then you have some behaviors that might be easy to do, others might need some, you'll need to organize other things around it. But then at least from an L&D perspective, then you've got a good idea about what you then need to do sort of to create that right environment. And then the trick is to make it super tiny and to connect it to anchor moments. So, for example, you want people to reflect more. Because, reflection is really, really important for improvement.
Yeah.
So after each project, I will write down or I will share with a colleague, what is the most important takeaway, what could we've done better, and what went really, really well. And then by sort of celebrating that, by saying, this really helps to improve our work. Super simple, no Aperol spritzes or sort of work drinks involved.
Just the intrinsic part of this helps you in your work.
Yeah.
So that means if you're co-creating with everyone that you need to start those tiny habits with, you also need to co-create tinily. Make it small.
Yeah.
Once again.
Yeah.
All right. So we keep talking about making it small, making it smaller, making it smaller. One critical question that we have, would that not just make things go slower, delay everything? If we're trying to keep things smaller, but we have this one lofty goal, then... Ooh.
But that's the idea. If you break it down into different tiny steps and different tiny behaviors, then eventually you'll get that idea of the compound interest, and then you will reach your goal. But if you start off straight away with the super big goal, and especially if just management says, we need to realize this by the end of the year, then that won't help, because then this is really, really big target, and then it just starts to become a goal in itself, but that you don't really have the means to accomplish it. And that's why that co-creation process is so important. Okay, so if this is the goal, how does that align with what you want to do, and what is your role within that bigger goal and ambition? And then what are the tiny behaviors you can do, your colleagues can do, your team can do to get there? To
make that environment way more conducive. Yeah. All right, so we're almost rounding this whole podcast off, but I'd like to ask both of you, what would be the one tip that you would give a person to start with their tiny habit journey? Sietske?
I think it's good to really think about, okay, what do you want people, what kind of behavior do you want people to show? Because I think most L&D people might know it, but not really that concrete. And that is usually the start. Yeah, just as we were, just saying, if in a year we need to be there, what are the small things that you can do in between, and what does that actually mean for the people on the floor, what they need to start doing tomorrow? And if you can work that out and can really think about, okay, what do I want to see in terms of behavioral change, then you can actually create that environment for people to move in a direction that is not only good for the company, but especially also for themselves, where they grow.
Invest some time in digging through that intrinsic motivation and see what people can actually latch onto.
Yeah.
Thank you. Awesome. Amy Jane?
I'm going to keep it short and sweet. And
Tiny,
we need to move away from go big and go home and keep it tiny. Tiny is transformative.
The steamroll approach. Very good. I basically say the same. I have this whole idea in my head for myself, of course. We're all really individualistic people. But starting that reading journey of getting that book up on my desk every morning, 9 o'clock sharp, get a coffee, read one page, remind myself that I need to do that one page in my calendar, for instance, I don't know, and then just steamroll my way through. I'll get back to you guys and see whether I can finish this book within 254 days. Thank you both for being here. All right. That's all we have time for today. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Moving Forward. If you've learned something new today, please share this episode with a colleague or a friend. And while you're at it, just give us a review. This helps others to find our podcast and might help them move their people forward too. Thanks for joining us, and until next time.